Hi everyone, this is Professor Jie Ren. Welcome to my podcast, When Tech Meets Ed. Today we are talking about a very, very interesting topic, which is creativity and AI, with a good friend of mine, Dr. Kai Wang, who is an expert in this domain. So Kai, why don't you introduce yourself?
All right, thank you. So first of all, it's a great pleasure to be here. So honestly, I'm a little it's humbling because I know you have some really great speakers in the previous episode. So I really
You're also
appreciate it.
good. Come
Thank
on.
you. Right. Okay. Thank you. So anyway, right, to introduce myself. So I am now a basically entrepreneur, even though I do some adjunct teaching on the side. So mainly I help companies and the people to innovate and grow. Sometimes with the help of AI, but not necessarily. So my company's name is AI Ager, but that's a different topic. So anyway, the other thing is that I have been studying creativity and creative thinking for more than a decade. So and that's why I believe that there's something to share, and also, like you said, in this AI era, there's even more to talk.
100%. So I think I heard someone saying this, like AI is able to amplify one's ability. Kind of with AI, we are all becoming Superman, right? So let's talk about, the human core of it, right? And then before we say, oh, let's get this cape to become Superman. Okay, so could you please define creativity, since that's very much, like the essential part of
Right.
human, right? So yes, please.
Well, you actually talk about two things, right? So you talk about the definition of that, and the second thing is that it's a core part of humanity. Okay.
Yes.
So the first thing, yes, the definition. So the definition in the academic world is actually relatively straightforward, even though it can be defined in different ways. The most common definition is creativity is defined as the process or the ability to generate something new and useful. So that's a widely accepted definition. For the general public, though, it can be a pretty vague and sometimes confusing term. So in the public view, sometimes it can be confused with artistic creativity, meaning they are not totally separate, but they are two distinct concepts in general. So I think there's a little bit of confusion about creativity only being about art, which is not so, not just in academic world, but in reality. So that's the definition part of that. Maybe slightly more about that is exactly, it's not just about art, right? So creativity can be just generating something new and useful, which can be as simple as coming up with a joke, right? Which is pretty daily or sometimes routine task, or just routine part of our life. Right? Even if just coming up with a new way of saying something, that can be an example of creativity as well. So it's really pretty, I would say, like everyday aspect of life. It can be part of everyday life. So that's the first part we talk about. The second part you talk about is that creativity being a core part of a humanity. I think that's it is
one dimension at least.
It is a pretty. I think it's relatively well accepted, right? I don't think it's something that the general public think about, on a daily basis.
That's true.
And that in general, though, I think at least many people agree that being creative is a essential part of basic our life.
Yes, so I definitely agree with you. Like creativity is not only about artistic output, and then it could be very much about day-to-day routines, and then or for like companies R&D efforts, right? So definitely that's the source for that effort. And then since you talk about the public perception of creativity, right? Even though many could believe the same way, which is creativity is one dimension of the human core value. So why should we care about creativity? Because like some people could definitely get a relatively well-paid job without applying creativity to their everyday routine at work. So why should we care?
Yeah, I think that's a super interesting and important question. And the reason why I believe so is obviously I have been studying and kind of merging myself. What's the best word? Basically, I've been studying creativity for a very long time. And
Immersive
to me,
learning.
right, to me, it's like, it's obviously so super important. But when I talk to other people, it seems to be a totally different story, right? So everyone has, his or her own priorities. And oftentimes I have to come back to exactly the question you asked. Why should people care, right? Because it turns out that many don't. Okay. So I think creativity sometimes is not something that people care about naturally for a couple of different reasons. But I think the most obvious reason is that we seems to be just doing okay without thinking about it, right? So, for example, many college graduate, even though some struggle, but many do find good jobs without necessarily putting a lot of creative thinking type of credentials in their resume, right? And for senior people, for let's say CEO or whoever, right? They don't have to brag about how creative they are. But the thing is that creativity doesn't have to be something that is just world changing, right? Not something that you have to win a Nobel Prize for. It is something that can be, again, like we said earlier, it can be something as simple as just saying something in a different way, right? Or frames a important problem in a different way.
Yes.
It could also be just some small improvement in your R&D process, in developing a new product, new process, right? It could be just a slightly better way of running a business. Or it could be just something, again, you just tell a joke to a friend, which all of that is creativity. And because there are different levels of it, and most people are doing perfectly fine without, the most prominent, like superstar level of creativity that gives people the wrong impression as if this whole thing doesn't matter that much. So actually, we need a lot of creativity in just general, just in our daily lives, right? So for example, let's say my train, if I came here by train and by subway and so on, right? So what if something didn't work, right? What if a train is stopped for whatever reason, right? So we do need to think outside, just a routine way. I had to, if that happened, I had to figure a way to come here. People may not think that is as creativity, but it actually do need some, out of just out of our routine way of getting something done, right? And that is something that people might not realize as much. So that's the first major point, which is, again, creativity has different levels, and we don't really need the top superstar level of creativity, but we do need to have some sort of novel thinking or ingenuity in just navigating through the challenges of our daily life. That's the first reason why I think it's super. It's more important than many people recognize. The second reason I believe it is very important. It is particularly in this AI era, right? So honestly, the trend of automation went back all the way, a long time. But particularly in the AI era, a lot of obviously routine tasks can be automated, and that actually put more value to the non-routine work, right? And simply because of that, our ability to think creatively is going to just be increasingly more important.
Yeah. So based upon what you said, I want to kind of deviate a little bit to talking about like people's attitudes towards newness.
Okay.
Do you think that is also part of the reasons? Because like we all took the innovation management class during our PhD program, right? So Schumpeter's theory basically saying that, so innovation is truly about the combination of the prior entities in different ways, in new ways. So basically the keyword truly is newness. Do you think that people's tendency as human beings, like we tend to get into our comfort zone very much, and then that kind of level of comfort, and then we don't like it's not against our human nature, kind of like it's not like we are being lazy or something. It's just it feels so comfortable, right? So we don't want to embrace that uncertainty that is associated with this newness. Do you think that's also part of the reason?
Well, yeah, definitely that's part of the reasons. By the way, it's complex, right? So it's not one or just
100%.
two. Right. So but by the way, that can lead to a different conversation. Creativity is like essentially like having this dual nature, meaning whatever you say about creativity, the opposite almost always is also true. But anyway, that's a different topic.
Yes.
So I think related to that, there's like a dual or two aspects of human nature that is kind of in conflict. One is actually we crave for we really want newness, right? So for example, a lot of people like to go to, let's say, go on an adventure or just try something new, right? It's kind of like human nature, right? So some people just like to do extreme stuff, like extreme sports, right? Yes. Or as simple as you go to Six Flags just to explore
roller coasters.
Right, exactly, some extreme physical conditions. So to some extent, people really love the new experience. But there's again another aspect of human nature that is exactly what you said, right? So we are comfortable in the comfort zone. The comfort zone, that's exactly what it means.
Yes.
So because we are more comfortable in our comfort zone, so something that is new sometimes can like create it's almost like immune response to something exotic or too new. So both of that are human nature. So there is this kind of inherent conflict or inherent contradiction. But yes, I think in general it applies to most people, right? Pretty much all people. That because we are inherently just feeling more secure in our comfort zone, and that kind of makes creative ideas a little harder to be adopted or to spread out. Yeah, that can be part of the reason too. Yeah.
Yeah, so like based upon what you just said, right? I truly like this dual system that you mentioned. The adventurous nature, that's one dimension. The other dimension is that our tendency to stay in the comfort zone. So in the context of promoting creativity, we should very much embrace our adventurous nature of it, right? Okay, so so now so far we have set the stage, right, in terms of the definition of creativity and why it is important. Then let's talk about the cake, right? AI, right? Okay. So AI is becoming so popular and then it is evolving so quickly. And then many alternative tests have shown that AI indeed is creative in different contexts, such as artistic output, problem solving, and also idea generation. So could you please also elaborate on how could we incorporate AI in humans' creative work process?
Right. So again, two aspects, right? So for one, maybe just elaborate a little bit on the fact that AI's capability is increasing really fast in the creative domain. And the second, of course, is what do we do about it? How do we integrate it? So the first aspect, so there is a recent paper published in 2025 in Scientific Reports, which is a journal under Nature umbrella. Nature has a lot of journals, right? Anyway, Scientific Report is pretty solid journal. So what they did, it actually was done by a business school professor and his team. So they find out the more recent AI models, such as GPT-4, or maybe even more recent than that, they did better than average student across board, meaning on different kind of typical creative thinking tasks. So a very commonly used task is to name alternative uses of objects, right? So for example, what may be all the ways to use, let's say, umbrella? Obviously, we can use it in different ways than just blocking the sun or blocking the rain. Anyway, so in those kind of tasks, so again, basically, an average student is not going to win over AI. That alone, though, does not necessarily mean that AI is objectively, absolutely more creative than the average person. However, it definitely means that it has a lot of potential or a lot of use of that in for example, generating ideas. So that can lead to the second aspect, which is how do we integrate that? So I think it is relatively straightforward that we can just ask AI when we need ideas.
For ideation.
Right. So, for example, if we, let's say, as an example, right? Let's say if we have this podcast, right? And let's say we need ideas to get it out and get more attention, which obviously is an important aspect.
Yes.
And we can simply go to AI and ask for it, right? So I think that's pretty straightforward. However, there's a downside to it if we do this too early. Meaning, if we skip the part that we just think for ourselves first, and then go straight to AI and ask, it basically bypass our own, otherwise our own thinking. And that may be a bad thing for at least two reasons. For one, AI could be biased, even though it is, articulate and it is, it can generate ideas very fast, and many of them, and actually many of them are good. It could still be biased, right? Because it's based on whatever it's trained on. It's basically a history, and the history does teach us a lot, but not necessarily, have all the ideas for the future.
Yes,
that's one aspect. But honestly, I think the bigger risk is the second aspect, which is if we automatically just reach out to AI for our ideas, it is basically giving up our
own thinking ability.
Right, yeah, our own thinking, which can become a habit.
Oh, very true.
Right, and we talked about this before, but obviously now everyone is using GPS to navigate, and myself included. And now we just don't, even think about it, right? So as if we don't have the ability to navigate it. We actually do. It actually needs practice, but now people don't even want to practice anymore. So that's the motivation part, which a lot of people may not recognize, which is if we just have AI take over, that don't just take over our own ability, our own practice, right? Our own chance to practice, but it could take away our motivation. And I think that's the bigger risk. So how to deal with that? I think in general, we should at least give us a pretty good amount of time to think for ourselves first before we use AI. And we should use AI as a supplement, right? Meaning, in addition to what we think, what could be what may be something we missed, right? Or what may be some additional ideas. I think that's a much better way to use it.
Yeah, so I can share some of my own experiences in terms of preparing for the podcast. So for every single episode, I prepare a topic. And then my immediate thinking is like, should I use ChatGPT to brainstorm to see what questions I could be using to ask the guest speakers? I did try once though. And then, so I put in the topic in ChatGPT, and there was like a long list of questions I could choose from. But then I decided not to use it 100%. Sometimes I do use it for inspiration. The reason is that I want the conversation to be very personal and related to the guest speaker. So if I ask the overarching questions, and then they don't really feel like I'm having a cozy conversation, and then to get to know this guest speaker. So that's kind of so I totally understand. It can help as a supplement, but not truly to replace my thinking in terms of that. And the other one I want to share and also address is the use of the map navigation application. So very true. I mean, I'm so bad at directions, and then it definitely helps. And then I was thinking, like, if I didn't really get a chance to use any of these navigation apps in my phone, probably I'm super good at knowing the directions. And now basically I give up, right? Because the applications are so convenient. So it's the same logic. If anyone is constantly relying on AI to replace their own creative thinking, and the outcome is also very good, and then there's no need, right, like for that person to like not motivated enough, right, to think about things in a creative way, 100%. Okay, so we kind of touched upon, right, the human's motivation, and then the need for to keep humans creative thinking. So in your opinion, how should we keep human in the loop in the creative work process?
Okay, right. So the earlier point, right, we discussed, or I brought up early, that is, we should probably start with human thinking first. And it's not just good as it's a good exercise to just keep our thinking alive, but also it's very important in the sense that we humans bring in the context, exactly like you said, right? So, for example, when you do a podcast, you actually have the context. You know the speaker. You know what the speaker might address, right? So you have that context in your mind, and typically it's not very feasible for you to give all that context to AI, right? So, and it's not necessarily desirable in the first place.
Yes.
Anyway, so because we humans have the context, and for us to think first, it's going to set the direction right? Because otherwise, AI doesn't really know the context. It may give you some even good ideas, but the thing is that the AI most likely will miss the context, and that can set the stage for something that is not necessarily in the right path, right? So, for example, AI may give you a really plausible, set of either questions or ideas that seems to be good, and then we might have a tendency to follow along, and that may lead to a different path, which is going to miss a lot of context, right? And again, context matters, right? So obviously, in a lot of work scenarios, context is super important. Yes. So starting with human is, I think, in general, is very important. After human thinking, then bringing the AI as a supplement, right? So again, what are additional perspectives, additional ideas, right? Or additional ways to think about this problem or to consider the ideas, right? I think that can be super useful. And that's kind of the part you talk about, like we are becoming Superman. Yes. It's like we need to put our own, skin on, like our own clothes on before we put the cape on, or whatever the expression is. Okay, whatever. So having that AI as a supplement, I think can be super powerful, right? It's almost making us having superhuman capabilities. But then after that, you probably still want to bring back to the human aspect, in the sense that AI can provide great input and supplemental ideas or perspectives. At the end, we still want to produce something that is for humans, right? So we don't produce either ideas or products or essays or whatever. It eventually is for humans. So that final touch is probably much better to be handled by humans. So in other words, for example, AI may give us ideas or supplemental ideas. And let's say if we are developing an essay or a project proposal, at the end, right, we still probably want to put a human touch on it. Because again, at the end, whatever the end output is, most likely who's going to consume that is human, right? So having human, because we have the context, the understanding, and how it may be finished in a way that is appropriate for the audience. I still think in most cases it's better for humans to do that. By the way, this is not my idea per se, right? So there actually was brought up by some other people in the field. So there's so-called sandwich principle. It was I forgot the name exactly, but anyway, he mentioned this sort of sandwich principle, like human, AI, human, in the sense that we put AI as like a middle layer or a middle step, and that may be a better way in general. A better way of integrating.
Can I understand it as like we humans start the process, kind of like a project manager, and then we could give very concrete instructions, and also in that context, to ask AI to do the work, and then we do the evaluation in the end as humans. So is that the sandwich principle that you mentioned?
To some extent, yes. Not necessarily have AI do the work and we evaluate, which I think is also a common notion out there, suggesting that since AI is so powerful, maybe we design the work, AI do the work, and we evaluate, right? Which is not necessarily.
It also can be like a recursive process.
Right. Yeah, yes. And again, it can be. Well, I think it can be feasible and desirable in some occasions, but I think in creative work, my personal opinion is that we might not want AI to handle all the creation part. So again, for the reasons I just mentioned, for one, we need humans to bring in the context, but for the other, we actually need to get our own thinking active. because at the end, it is something that we actually are going to act upon. That's, by the way, that's actually an additional perspective, which is when we create something, let's say a proposal or an essay or idea, a business plan, right? At the end is to be implemented, right?
Yes.
And to be implemented, we need to be motivated.
Yes.
And I think that's another aspect that many people don't recognize, which is even if AI gives a perfect idea, right, perfect business plan, it's humans to implement it. And guess what? So if we have our own input in the business plan, we are much more likely to be motivated. As opposed to, so for example, let's say I go to AI, I generate a perfect business plan and give it to you. And you will be less likely in general to implement that than, let's say, you actually crafted a big chunk of that business plan. Even if the final plan is identical.
There is the sense of belongingness.
Exactly right. Yes. So you do have your own contribution. You can put your signature on that plan. That alone can make a lot of difference.
Yeah. Can I understand in two different ways combined? One is the ability of AI, right? Of course, there are different levels of capacity for the ability. The second one is still the public perception or individual users' perception of the use of AI. I still feel like it is not something that I created, right? As the creative work. So therefore, I'm not the owner of it. I don't own up to it. Therefore, psychologically, I'm less motivated to carry on to implement the plan.
I believe so. And I think, well, first of all, my own experience is like that. And second, I think in general, in just studies about human motivation, I think in general, it's not a secret that if we feel that we own something, we are much more likely to actually get it done. Right? So if we actually have AI do every creation part of it, and if we only do the evaluation part, right, which can be feasible, by the way, not necessarily always desirable, right? So again, my point is, even if the output, the plan is identical, exactly the same, created partially by me versus created entirely by AI, the way that how much I'm going to devote to it is going to be different, and that devotion is actually going to make a lot of difference that many people just don't recognize that.
So, okay, if I summarize, right, what you just said about how to keep human in the loop. So first of all, we need to be like leading the process, to be motivated enough, right, to lead the process. AI is a tool as a supplement. And for the creative part, we still want to devote ourselves to it, right? And then again, like AI could do the work, right, just to supplement this entire process according to its different abilities for different purposes during the whole process.
I believe so. I don't think people have published a lot around that, but according to my experience, again, we both you and me have studied creativity for a while.
Yeah.
I think in general that's much more desirable, and I don't believe that people have emphasized that enough, because a lot of people treat creative work as if it's just about the output, right? But again, my point is, you are going to do something about output, right? So you create a business plan, you are actually going to implement that. And who is going to implement that? It's only those people who are devoted enough. So if the whole plan is created by AI, why should I, throw my life to it and spend the next 4 decades on this business plan? I'm not going to do that. Very simple, because I would much more likely to devote myself to something the plan that I actually wrote part about, right? So as an example, not necessarily business plan, but just as an example, the motivation part is missing from a lot of our conversations. A lot of hypes out there that people. I just think that is kind of ignored.
Yeah. So this is actually a great point to transition to the next question. I definitely feel this because I also paint, and then when I paint, I feel like it's not only the output per se. I also very much enjoy the whole process of painting.
Right, exactly.
So I get joy out of this creative process, right? So that's also like one of the points that you touched upon, right? So in the artistic world, people have different attitudes towards AI. Some people will be like, I don't want to use AI at all because I want this whole process to be purely human based. And then let's say someone decides to not use AI at all for creative work, not necessarily about artistic creation, could be like other types of creation, right? Such as the day-to-day routine, such as the idea generation or problem solving. Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think that is a good option?
I think it's a personal choice, right? So especially if it's about artistic choice, then I don't think I have much to comment on that.
Yeah, let's leave that out of picture and then focus on the more.
All right. So if we don't talk about artistic choice, it's their choice, and I totally respect whatever they choose.
If that's their signature style, yes.
If someone, in general, let's say if we are dealing with just in general, business problem solving or just generating ideas. For example, generating ideas for podcasts and so on. I think in general, AI can have a pretty good contribution. And I think it can be pretty powerful as a supplement. And if we don't use it, which probably is okay in many occasions, but we could be missing out a lot. So in general, I don't think I can say that in absolute terms, but in general, if we don't use AI in our creative work, there is a pretty good chance that we're missing out a lot.
We are losing the cape to be the Superman.
Kind of, right. Yes, I mean, so like we mentioned earlier, right? So we already have peer-reviewed studies showing that AI basically can generate, ideas around some creative thinking tasks above just average college students. That, by the way, is pretty remarkable achievement. I don't think people have talked about that enough. Even though there could be counter argument in the sense that maybe AI has seen the question already, but that's beside the point. So the point meaning AI is able to generate a lot of options that may be out of our own, routine thinking. Just as an example, right? Let's say you are developing your podcast. And obviously, there are a lot of different topics you can talk about.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure you're able to develop a pretty good list, solid, high-quality list by yourself. But I still think there's a very good chance that AI can contribute additional topics or additional ways to either frame your podcast or to connect that to some different domain, right?
Just let me think outside the box, essentially.
Right, bring in an additional perspective. I think is a very, very powerful thing. It's actually one of the major aspects of creativity.
Yes, divergent thinking.
It's right. So I think yes, in general, if we don't tap into that, it's kind of missing out on something that is cheap and powerful and could be potentially transformative, right? So it could transform the whole creative work in a different way. So I think, yes, in general, I think we probably should integrate somehow in most scenarios. So, but again, there are different ways to use it, right? So I think we still, in general, I think it's more desirable to have humans lead the process and be very deliberate, right? So knowing that...
But open to the use of AI.
Right. Be deliberate and open in bringing AI in such that we know why we use AI and we know the risk of being dependent on it and knowing, be deliberate in the sense that we know we have done our own part. We have done our own work in pretty high quality way. Now let's bring in AI to bring even additional ways. So or additional options or perspectives. I think that would be in general more desirable.
Nice. So then let's talk about kind of I wouldn't say the dark side of using AI, but at least some concerns and risks. You also mentioned that relying on not just AI and a digital creation, right? For example, our phones, that's very much like our brain extension right now, right? So if we rely on that too much, we are losing the motivation to train ourselves to achieve similar outcomes. So in addition to that, or if you want to elaborate on that, do you have other concerns that you want to talk about if someone chooses to rely on AI for creativity?
Right. I think the other aspect is related to what you just talked about, right? So when you do your painting, you actually find joy in it, right? You probably find some even meaning in it. which I think is a very, very obviously important part of our life in general, right? So
100%, yes.
we live to do something we find joy in and find meaning in.
It's not the apple that matters always. Of course it matters, but the whole process also matters.
Right. So I think in general, if we are kind of letting AI take that away, that would be a very, very bad thing. And by the way, another thing about it is it's not obvious, meaning the risk is not as obvious, right? Some risks are pretty obvious. For example, what is the obvious risk? Let's say I go out knowing that there's rain and I go out without an umbrella, the risk is obvious.
Yeah.
And the risk of AI taking over or taking away our, either joy or meaning or whatever we call it, is not as obvious. And especially, I think that the risk is particularly high for kids. In the sense that kids,
because they're in the learning process,
right? Kids are building up their habits, right? So
true.
By the way, we are academic, and by the way, we are kind of in the nerd camp.
We're all nerds, admit it.
And for whatever the downside of that, we nerds kind of have a good habit of, value and enjoy, reading, thinking, and so on, analyzing, and so on, right? And we already developed the habits through decades of training, or since we were kids. And kids right now, right, in 2025, they haven't really had that training yet. If they grow up, they grow up with AI, as a fact.
As a fact.
And if they kind of just rely on AI on their thinking, and especially deep thinking, which is particularly meaningful, right? And also bring joy. And also, of course, good for their career anyway. If people form the habit of having to rely on AI on that, once the habit forms, it's hard to get away, right?
It's hard to break.
And AI is getting more powerful and probably more user-friendly along the way.
Yes.
So in other words, basically, if the kids don't get started in the right way, then the long-term consequences can be severe.
Yes.
And again, true. I don't think that people have recognized that enough.
Because we are still in the very early days. We are talking about like decades later.
Right. That's part that I think is not obvious, but I think the consequences can be big.
I totally agree with you. I think the public definitely should be more aware of this, right? And then even though AI is super powerful, we still need us to rely on our own thinking, especially when it comes to kids' education.
Right.
Okay. So I have one more question, the final question for you, since we are talking about kids, we are talking about education. So any suggestion to, for example, students who want to practice their creativity and then increase their creativity in the age of AI, as the final remark for this episode?
Right, thank you. I think that's important, and maybe let me elaborate a little bit on the importance part, because again, I think for the general public, right, most of us just go through life without deliberately thinking about creative thinking or deliberately use our creative thinking per se. And it seems to be okay. It seems to be fine.
Yes,
it seems to be fine. And that's, again, a major reason why people don't just pay like lip service to. Like, we value creativity. Everyone says that. But when you actually say, did you actually go through training, right? Did you learn the method? Most people don't even, think that's something on their list of priority at all. So I think the very first thing is to have the mindset, in the sense that mindset meaning don't just treat creativity as a skill. I think that's a pretty common misconception, as if creativity is a skill like swimming, right? Swimming is a skill because you either have it or you don't have it. But the difference between creativity and swimming is that swimming is a skill that you only use in very particular scenarios, and you don't think about swimming just in your daily life. Creativity is different. Creativity is a mindset in the sense that it actually can be an attitude towards life, right? So meaning whatever things we do and whatever approach we take, it is just one of the many things or many approaches possible. And there's always ways to either improve, or there are always different ways to do it, right? And that mindset is super important to have in the first place. And that's, I haven't even talked about AI yet, right? So I think without that mindset, treating creativity with AI solely as a skill is missing a big part of that, right? Again, just as a mindset, I think if we're talking about students, right, I think we should have the mindset to start with. So again, whatever we pursue in life, there are different ways to achieve that, different approaches, and we're only taking one approach. That's the basic recognition of the mindset. The other aspect of that is to, I think very important, is to pick something that you actually care about in long term to work on. Right. So we can call it passion, or we can call it devotion, or whichever way. And I think it's particularly important in the AI era, in the sense that because AI is so powerful and so transformative, basically it's going to replace a lot of routine tasks, and the remaining tasks, first of all, is going to be more likely to be creative, but more importantly, I think students in general go through education to build a long-term career, right? Typically they don't go to college just to get a job that can just get by. They want to build a career.
Yes.
And the career is a decade-long thing. And it's not going to be the most successful if it's not something that you are going to persist. Right. So in other words, if we change our direction every 2 years, pursuing whatever the most shining thing out there, it might not be the most productive way, right? Especially when AI is so powerful and there are a lot of distractions. But at the end, we want to make sure that our capabilities are marketable or competitive, whichever way we call it, right? It's actually built upon very long accumulation. Right? Just like if you do a PhD, you need a lot of time.
Yes.
But students, they want to be very competitive and really have something in their mind that is very, very marketable. It needs to be something that you actually will persist on. And by the way, that is something that AI is not able to do as of now. I don't know whether it's going to change in 10 years. But what I mean by that is we humans can actually potentially do something for 10 years, right?
So it's just even more than that.
Yeah, of course, more than that. And that's actually, it turns out to be a huge advantage that AI doesn't have, right? So AI can have some very, very major advantages over humans, right? So its power, its knowledge, its ability to connect different dots, it's able to create 100 ideas, and all those things are great, are fantastic. But what AI is not able to do, and at least for probably in the near future, is that AI is not going to do something for the next 10 years, right? So unlike us, right? For example, we maybe study creativity for 10 years, but I don't expect that AI is going to do something for 10 years continuously and continuously improve. And I think that's going to be a very big advantage of humans. That is, we are able to actually choose something and persist for a very long period of time. And that's going to have a non-linear or just increasing return on the time you invested in.
So can I kind of summarize what you just said as that with AI, we could be Superman. But before we face this opportunity or use this opportunity, let's make sure that we invest in ourselves long term to be creative first. And then we can put on the cape and become a creative Superman.
Right.
And with AI, I supplement.
I believe so. Thank you. That's a very, very fantastic summary.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming.
All right. Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.